reliable evidence that you can get on the election in the new year. But I can't ignore what constituents were saying to me. They ignored or didn't believe the evidence, or even worse, didn't care. And I think there's a lot we need to take from that and what that means about how we conduct ourselves. Politics and politicians really need to take that on board. The emotional response to Brexit, and that has what it has been, I think is a lesson for all of us. So I reiterate, I categorically reject this bill, but I want to work with the government to make sure that we ameliorate the worst effects of it, so that it's not going to harm my constituents. And I implore the government to listen and do all that they can to build a consensus on this. Thank you.
Rowley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a privilege to be returned to this place to represent my home area, North East Derbyshire, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here again and to continue doing that. And as my constituents would expect, I rise to support this bill, and I will be voting with the government tonight. And it is just over, or this afternoon even, it is just over a year since I stood in these benches, and unfortunately, with great regret, had to say that I would not be supporting my government when the initial iteration of this bill came. And that is something which I think all of us who served in the previous Parliament, particularly on these benches, regret what happened over the last year or so. Wherever we stood, whatever our views, there was a fog which descended on this place, which meant that people here, otherwise rational, otherwise willing to look at the wider picture, were unable to do so, and it paralysed our politics. And today marks a really important stage for many of us that we can start to move on. Because somewhere when that fog descended was somewhere when we became paralysed. It stopped being an issue about the European Union. It stopped being an issue about what trade deals we may or may not do in the future. It stopped being an issue about whatever regulation we may or may not adopt. It became a basic question of trust. And I do not say that with any triumphalism to the member for Wirral South, who's no longer in a place, but I thought made an excellent speech a number of minutes ago. I say it with relief. We are now going to be able to deliver on the decision of the British people, and however profoundly some people in this place disagree with it, that is a basic principle that we all need to recall and remember, and that is why I will be going through the government lobbies today. But I also want to address, again, something which was raised by people who are also not in their place, particularly the member for Bath. There is this weird conflation, which I regret hugely, in this place, that some values, liberal values, which I share, cannot be epitomised and cannot be espoused by those of us who also believe in leaving the European Union. The European Union is not the panacea for everything that is good in this country. But I also say the European Union has done many good things. I am somebody who believes in the values of openness, of tolerance, of inclusivity, of being welcoming, of wanting to be internationalist, of wanting to work with countries all across the world and in Europe. And I am also a Brexiteer, because I think, even if people profoundly disagree with me, that there is a case, that there is an intellectual case that can be made that you can be both of those. And what liberalism must consider, and those who advocate liberalism in this place must consider, that their conflation of those values with remaining is something which will do their cause a great disservice over the long term. And then finally, I would just appeal, and I hope you don't mind as somebody who's been here for only 2 years, I would just appeal to those of us who have been in this chamber for a little bit of time. The debate today has been good in many senses, but it has also started to see the retreat into the comfort zones of some people here. We have already started to see the excuses, the desires that I would want to support this in principle, but I'm unable to do so for some confected or real reason. But actually, what the greatest speech which I think we've seen here today, which again, the member is not in the place, is the member from South Shields, who has stood up and said, I don't agree with this, but I'm going to do it. Now, I happen to agree with it. And in time, I may disagree with something, but when the people say something, I hope that I will be enough of a Democrat in time to be able to recognise that. And the thing which I really regret about this place is, if we had spent one iota of the time that we have done in the last 2.5 years talking about Brexit, about the things which are actually going to cause our areas and challenge our areas in the next 20 years, automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, we might actually be preparing our country for the challenges that are coming. So let's get this done, and let's talk about all the other important things we need to do.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Sir Gary, and a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank as well with the honourable member for North East Derbyshire, who spoke characteristically, thoughtfully, and without triumphalism. And I think that he is absolutely right. And the tone of this debate from now on, and I speak as must be in that tone, I speak as someone who represents a constituency that voted 78% for Remain. But let's be clear while we're here, Sir Gary. It has been a total failure of political craft. In 2015, even I voted for that second referendum because it is a convention in this House to support a government with a majority in the early days of its administration. And in 2015, the Conservative Party won the general election, and I backed that referendum against many of my instincts to do so. But from then on, it was a failure, a slow, a cumbersome, secretive, and it was a lot of dither. And I very reluctantly and late in the day came to the idea of a second referendum as a way of breaking that impasse. But it was not something that even in my very Remain constituency was part of the major discourse in 2017 in that general election. So I think when we're having debates about this, and as the honourable member said, entrench into positions, we have to remember that, and I urge the other side to remember that too. And I know that the Secretary of State, we've served together on the Public Accounts Committee, as I have indeed with the member for North East Derbyshire. That committee represented every range of views on Brexit in the last 2.5 years. You couldn't have had a more diverse range, and yet we produced over 11 reports that were unanimous, that were critical at times of the government, quite rightly, because I would hope the right honourable gentleman would expect us to be critical of him when he gets things wrong. But we went at it constructively, looking at the facts and looking at the data, and working hard to try and press the government to do a better job. So I do hope that, although I won't vote for this bill today, because I'm going to list the reasons why, that the government listens to those reasons, because they aren't just because we feel sore losers, but because there are very valid reasons that this rushed bill and the rushed debate on it could lead to real problems for the future. It's weak on workers' rights. That is categorically clear. And then assuming that there's going to be a trickle-down of benefits when businesses allegedly, or hopefully as the government would say, do well, is a poor argument. In my constituency, there are very many people working several low-paid jobs on irregular contracts, very insecure. I can't see how they're going to get the benefits, and I want to see that protection in law. There's the removal of the support for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, something I've been dealing with as an elected politician since 1994, when we found them wandering alone on Holloway Road in Islington, where I was then a councillor. And the importance of the EU partnership in dealing with that is important. But let's not forget why they come. It's trafficking. So, Gary, let's deal with the cause, not the symptom. And I think it is mean-spirited to take that out. And there are many issues which we haven't got time to go into today around security. And I was the Home Office Minister negotiating for the British government on many of these issues when we were last in government, which is now quite some time ago. There are other issues too. The fixed end of the implementation period, I think, is a really foolish step, if I may say respectfully to the right honourable gentleman, because it allows no wriggle room. And I know there's this great belief on the government side that if you set a deadline, you'll get a better negotiation. I think there's a real risk there that you could end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and that will not bring the country together. And then, of course, we're going to see the phoenix of the quangos, as many of our European regulations have to be replicated in British law. So much for the bonfire of red tape. And on immigration, I tremble. I represent myself and the honourable member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington represent between us 40,000 EU citizens. And any idea that the government can suddenly turn the immigration system and make a great, simple new deal on immigration is foolhardy. I've been there. I've seen 10 years of it getting worse, and I think that the government needs to heed that warning very carefully. But I'm also concerned about the length of time, Sir Gary, for debating this. It is too short and it's not democratic.
Thank you, Sir Gary. Welcome to your place. I hope you enjoy your time in the chair. And it's a pleasure to be back here in Parliament, although it's felt a little bit like Groundhog Day again today. I hope for the final time, as we all are able to move on. On Brexit, we've given all of us the same speech over and over and over again for the last 2.5 years in what has been a cyclical and repetitive debate that has gotten us nowhere until this election has provided a very decisive breakthrough. And it's fantastic to be here to begin to deliver for the people of this country when we have made these promises for so long to now be able to begin to legislate to get Brexit done. And it may be the perfect day in politics because not only are we able to begin that process, but the Attorney-General has also gifted us his version of A Night Before Christmas, which will make for a very festive time that should meet with universal acclaim. It is a fantastic day for us all. The people of Mansfield voted 71% to leave in the referendum, and they've shared our frustration and the anger felt by many people in this place over the last 2.5 years. They wanted us to be grown-ups and to sort this thing out. And they were decisive in this election too. They returned me to this place with an increased mandate and an increased majority. And I thank them profusely, and I intend to serve them with all sincerity and to the best of my ability in this Parliament. And that starts with delivering this bill beginning today. And I tell them now there is no reason or excuse why we can't get this done now by the 31st of January. We will get it delivered and we will do exactly as we have promised. And I'm sure that the majority of my constituents will celebrate in that fact. I welcome the commitments in this bill, new commitment to this 2020 deadline for a trade deal. I think we saw the impact of a never-ending, constantly moving deadline in the previous Parliament that simply did not work, that weakened our hand, and now we have the ability to show that strength and the determination that the Prime Minister has shown throughout his time in office. And I would like to point out to members opposite who consistently have raised issues of workers' rights, of regulatory standards. This isn't a bill about workers' rights or regulatory standards. It's not true to say that there is an inevitable decline in those things from leaving the European Union. The fact is, and the point of all this, is that this House will decide, and this country will decide, our own standards and regulatory standards. And actually, you continue, not you, Mr Streeter, Sir Gary, but the opposition continue to miss the point of what Brexit was about. There was a very well-known slogan in the referendum about control. You may remember it. It was largely, for many people, about control and about the sovereign powers of this Parliament. Aligning ourselves to EU directives defeats the entire purpose of what Brexit was about. We can, as a UK Parliament, go further and faster and better than the European Union in areas like the environment, in areas like workers' rights, and it will be us in this place that will decide. And that is exactly what all of us who have pushed to get this thing over the line over the last few years have been waiting for. So I'll back this bill today. I look forward to planning with certainty this time for a celebration on the 31st of January in my constituency, and I have huge optimism for the future of this country with this fantastic and decisive and determined Conservative government.
Davis.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's clear that the Conservatives overwhelmingly won the election for a variety of reasons, but on the Brexit front, it is also the case that 16.5 million people voted for Remain parties, compared to 14.5 million for Leave parties. And in fact, when you add on the parties that don't support the particular deal, namely the Brexit Party, there's 18.1 million people who aren't supporting this oven-ready deal that we're being served up and asked to consume very quickly today. And I think on that basis, there still should be a public vote on this, because this is the long-term future of Britain. I know people don't agree, but my judgment is that we'll be poorer, weaker, more divided and isolated, and that people who voted Leave in my constituency, and of course many did, voted for more money, more control and more jobs. And they will judge this deal on whether they deliver that. And I say to people who've taken Labour seats on the back of Get Brexit Done, if we don't deliver those things Leave voters asked for, they will be very unhappy. And it's not just that they're unhappy, they will have lost their jobs, and I assume they will come back to the Labour Party. We are leaving the single market, and one of the primary architects of that, of course, was Margaret Thatcher, who saw this as probably the most perfect free and fair trade market in the world. And we are not just saying we'll have no alignment, or indeed we won't have a dynamic alignment, but we'll have dynamic disalignment. In other words, as the European Union changes its rules, we'll change our rules in a different way. And what this means is that the prospects of agreeing a deal within 12 months become vanishingly small, and the prospects of knowing we'll agree a deal in 6 months by June even less. And this also means that the Chinese and the United States and other countries will look at us and see we're increasingly turning our back on our biggest markets, which gives them bigger power in negotiations. As we stand alone, turning our back on the EU, when we talk to the United States, who will say they don't want any environmental considerations to do with climate change in their trade deals, as they already have. They don't really care that much about food standards. They want hormone-impregnated meat and chlorinated chicken. They do want our NHS database. They do want to enforce patents so drugs will be more expensive. And it is the case they sell asbestos and all the rest of it. So as we move away from the regulatory protection of the EU, we are in their hands. And on human rights, when we talk to China, we will have to obviously be on our bent knee to China in terms of getting trade. They will say, no, don't mention human rights in Hong Kong and all this sort of stuff. Just stay to the point and do what we say. They're already building HS2 and, in fact, a lot of other infrastructure here. So it's important that this Parliament, if this is about democracy, we have greater scrutiny of these trade deals and we go into these things with our eyes opened. Finally, on human rights, I'm very concerned about this issue about unaccompanied minors. And frankly, it did have a strange echo of remembering that Donald Trump, of course, has separated children from their parents who are refugees and put them in detention camps. This is our great friend Donald Trump. And at the same time, in the Queen's speech, we've seen the abolition of the BBC, the civil service, the judiciary. They're all under threat. So our fundamental values shared across Europe of democracy, human rights and the rule of law are under threat. And I would say to all new members in particular, think carefully about what's in the balance here. I know you're driving through in great merriment on the back of get Brexit done in sort of pre-Christmas pantomime mode, but we need to think what's best for Britain and best for democracy, and that means proper scrutiny of this bill.
Please, Mr Mark Horsey.
Thank you, Sir Gary, and it's a great pleasure to be the tail ender on this side in a debate which has had a very welcome change in tone from that of previous debates on this topic. May I first of all thank the voters of Rugby and Bulkington for returning me for the fourth time with an increased majority, as I think is the case for almost all colleagues on this side, and is an endorsement of our party's attitude. And I will be supporting the bill to leave the European Union this afternoon, as I have done on 4 previous occasions. And I want to reflect on the effect on business. On the Business Select Committee, we looked at the impact of leaving the EU on automotive, aerospace, food and drink and pharmaceutical. And in each case, business leaders told us of few benefits of leaving the EU, and their concerns that what benefits there were would be outweighed by the harm, and much of the harm has been the uncertainty that business has had to go through over the past 2.5 years. Businesses want to see frictionless trade, to be able to continue with just-in-time supply chains and to retain access to a market of 500 million consumers on their doorsteps. And I know from my own business career before arriving here, it is easiest to deal with your closest neighbours, and that will be very important in the comprehensive trade deal that we conduct with the EU once we have left. It will be important not to neglect what's on our doorstep. But the business view about the need to get Brexit done is just as strong as that all of us encountered when we were on the doorsteps. And as a West Midlands MP, I'm very concerned about the impact on automotive. Many of my constituents work for Jaguar Land Rover, and many of the companies in my constituency are in the supply chain. And it is of concern that the Society of Motor Manufacturers figures out today show UK output down year on year. Part of that because of shutdowns that were put in place to deal with the concerns of disruption caused by potentially leaving the EU without a deal on the 31st of October. It is important that we've now got that uncertainty out of the way, and businesses will be able to grow and develop. And we will start to see very substantial investment. In fact, over the last couple of years, despite the uncertainty of Brexit, there has been substantial private sector investment in my own constituency. Megit involved in components for aerospace. I'm currently building the biggest factory to be built in the UK for 10 years. Moto are building a new motorway service area at Junction 1 of the M6 in Rugby. And local builder and developer Stepnells have just delivered a whole range of medium-sized industrial units ready for existing businesses to expand into. Developments at this scale and at a time of great uncertainty lead me to be extremely confident that there is a pipeline of new projects that can now get started, because we are on our way of dealing with leaving the European Union, and that will benefit communities and workers all across the UK. And in my last minute, I just want to refer to the effect on democracy, and I noted the remarks of the member for Ashford. I too noticed on the doorsteps during the campaign that many constituents told us they wouldn't be voting, they wanted to opt out. Now that's not unusual, because many people have a low opinion of politicians, but I sensed that at this election there were more people intending to not vote or to waste their vote, and because they had voted in the referendum and the politicians that had not delivered on what they'd voted for. Politicians cannot, we in this place cannot choose which votes we wish to respect, and we are now able to deliver for all of those who voted in the general election and in the referendum.
Thank you very much. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Sir Gary. This has been a good debate on an extremely important bill. But before I turn to the bill, can I welcome the Secretary of State back to his place? And can I welcome all new members across the House to their places and the part that they will play in this Parliament. I hope they will get the support and comfort that they need wherever they sit. I want to make special mention to those making maiden speeches. We've had 3 of them in this debate, and in the best traditions across the House, they've been thoughtful and powerful. I actually always find maiden speeches a relief, because the House goes quiet and actually listens just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes to what the member's actually saying. And it's quite refreshing, because we don't do that often enough. And so I think both the speeches themselves and the way in which this House has listened to them have been a good example of the tradition that we need to carry on with. There have been other very good contributions across the House, and the tone has been markedly different in the main from the tone of previous debates, and let us keep it that way. The Right Honourable Member for Fareham spoke. She's not in her place. I used to face her across the dispatch box. I have to say I can't pretend I agree with very much of what she says. But she did reference that it was her first speech since she had become a mum. And therefore I'm sure I speak for the whole House in congratulating her and all those new parents since Parliament was dissolved. We've had a general election. There is a clear winner with a clear majority. So I say this to members opposite. With that majority, be careful. Be careful. Doing things because the government has a majority doesn't mean those things are right. New Clause 37 is an example of that. This is about unaccompanied child refugees. This was the incredible campaign that Lord Dubs, Alf Dubs, ran to protect child refugees post-BrExit. And that campaign's been running for several years, that campaign for unaccompanied child refugees. And I know that members across the House have supported that campaign. Members from these benches and those benches have spoken powerfully about the case for unaccompanied child refugees. The commitment that was in the bill has been taken out. That is a moral disgrace, majority or no majority. And so I ask for those that will go into the lobby tonight to vote for this bill, and I know they will, and I understand that, but many of them will feel strongly about unaccompanied child refugees, and I ask them just to reflect for a moment on that. I turn to my own benches. We may have lost the general election, but we've not lost our values and our beliefs. Yeah. And we must fight for them day in, day out in this Parliament, and we will. So let me address the central issue. As a result of the general election, as a result of the majority the government's got and the mandate the government's got, we're leaving the EU. We will have left the EU within the next 6 months. Whatever side we were on, or no side at all, the Leave Remain argument goes with it. That doesn't mean that the deal negotiated by the Prime Minister is a good deal. It isn't. It was a bad deal in October when it was signed. It was a bad deal when it was first debated in this House in October. It was a bad deal last Thursday, and it's a bad deal today. In fact, it's worse today. It's worse today. Clause 30 in the previous bill gave Parliament a role in what happens next. There's a crucial decision to be taken in 6 months' time as to whether or not there should be an extension of any transition. Under the old bill, that was a decision that we collectively in Parliament would take according to the evidence and circumstances as they are in 6 months. A chance for Parliament to assess where the negotiations had got to and come to a decision on whether a deal would be negotiated within the period and take whatever measures are necessary to prevent no deal. That's been swept away. That's been taken out of the bill. All the promises that were made from that dispatch box about a new approach, that Parliament would be involved. We were told only a few weeks ago the Prime Minister had learned the lessons, and that one of the lessons was that to plough on without taking Parliament with you was a mistake, and there'll be a new approach because Parliament would be involved. And at the first opportunity, it's taken out. The new Clause 33 exacerbates that. This prevents the extension of any transition period. That is reckless and it's ridiculous, because the government has now chosen to give itself just 11 months to negotiate an entire trade deal and security deal. That's an unbelievably short period. And it can only lead to two outcomes: a bare-bones trade deal or no deal. I hear the chuntry. But if in November the negotiations have been going well, and let's hope they do, but they're not complete, and they need more time, and 2 months, 3 months would be enough. This now says we leave without a deal. So this doesn't provide for the situation where the negotiations have broken down. It also demands no deal where they're continuing. One of the other changes is Clause 34 and Schedule 4, the employment rights and protections. That's now gone. And it's said, oh, well, we'll put that in an employment bill. Well, let's just trace the history of that to test that proposition. There's a bill coming. Workplace rights were originally in the legally binding part of the deal agreed by the previous Prime Minister, the legally binding, internationally legally binding part. They were stripped out by this Prime Minister. They were put into the first draft of the bill before the general election, albeit in weak form. And on the 22nd October, in response to a question from my honourable friend from Barclay and Spen, the Prime Minister said, people will need reassurance, there can be no regression. They've now been stripped out. The direction of travel is very clear, and nobody should be taken in by assurances about any forthcoming bill. And frankly, when the Prime Minister this morning referenced, I think, the Factories Act, that didn't give us any. It's worth dusting off the Factories Act if that is the level of ambition for future workplace rights. If that is the height, if that's the shining example of what we're heading for, it gives 1841. So this started life as a bad bill. It's now even worse. The changes the government have made weaken protections for workplace rights, sideline Parliament, and weaken protections for child refugees. It tells you everything you need to know about the Prime Minister and this government, about their priorities and their values. They're not Labour values. This is not a deal we can support, and we'll be voting against it tonight. Thank you.
Brilliant. Mr. Secretary Barclay.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I join the Right Honourable and Learned Member for Holborn and St Pancras in welcoming new members to the House and also in reflecting the positive tone of the debate and the marked contrast that has been with previous debates in the previous Parliament. And can I also join him in congratulating and welcoming back the member for Fareham as a new mum to return her valued contributions to this House. Mr Deputy Speaker, the general election has delivered a clear instruction to this House to leave the European Union. Now Parliament must reflect the will of the country and make good on that democratic decision by backing this bill. This bill is not a victory for one side over another. The time has come to discard the old labels, to move from the past divisions and to come together as one united kingdom. Our country produced a mandate to leave the EU in 2016, but the previous Parliament rejected this time and time again. It has taken a second vote to ensure this mandate to leave is finally honoured. It is clear that the people did know in 2016 what they were voting for after all. Despite this, efforts of those determined not to accept the referendum result, we now have the opportunity in this House to end the delay and to forge a new relationship, both with our neighbours in Europe and indeed within this House. And it is reflecting that spirit that I very much welcome the speech of the member for South Shields, who said she would support the bill in the lobby this evening. Before, Mr Deputy Speaker, turning to the substance of the bill, may I congratulate the member for Belfast South for her very impressive maiden speech. She showed that she will contribute greatly to the work of this House, and her point about reconciliation struck a timely tone. The member for North Down also gave an excellent maiden speech, as indeed did the member for Stirling, who spoke powerfully of his opposition to Brexit, albeit in leaving an EU institution to come here, he has started his own Brexit as we vote on the bill. This bill delivers certainty for our citizens living in Europe and EU citizens living here in the UK by guaranteeing their rights as set out in Part 3 of the bill. It includes an independent monitoring authority which will rightly hold the government to account. There will be a grace period to ensure nobody is left behind in registering for the EU settlement scheme. The bill also protects frontier workers. It recognises professional qualifications and indeed it provides fair rights of appeal. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, is because we value the contribution of EU citizens who have built their lives in our country, and this bill will guarantee their rights to continue to do so.
My honourable friend's right to draw attention to the value that's been given to this country by those who travelled here. But the point about that, as he said when he spoke of accountability, is those decisions should be made by this Parliament, accountable to the British people, and that's why I anticipate our policies on migration, which will now have a chance to effect as a result of the passage of this legislation.
Well, my right honourable friend has always been a champion of the sovereignty of this House, and I will come on to how this bill indeed champions the very sovereignty I know he cares so passionately about. But the bill also unlocks confidence for our businesses by ending the dither and delay, which in turn will unlock huge new investment in our economy, ensuring more and better jobs. And this bill provides control for our Parliament, as indeed my right honourable friend reflects. Clause 1 reinforces the repeal of the Act, which brought European law into the UK. The bill ensures parliamentary scrutiny through the European Scrutiny Committee in Clause 29 and asserts parliamentary sovereignty through Clause 38. And I think the whole House will recognise the work of the member for Stone on this and so many issues reflected in this bill. The very essence of Brexit is that we will no longer outsource our decisions to others in Brussels.
Am I right on the friend give way?
Of course.
I thank my right honourable friend from giving way. We've heard a lot from the members opposite about their fear of bringing those decisions back to the United Kingdom, particularly about workers' rights. Can he absolutely confirm that this government has every intention of protecting and improving the rights of workers in this country? Who are overwhelmingly back the Conservatives in this election.
Well, I know my honourable friend is a champion of workers' rights and his constituents, and indeed he will know that not only does the manifesto make that clear commitment, page 5 of the manifesto sets out a clear commitment, but does so in parallel to this bill. Because this bill is about implementing into domestic law the international agreement my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has reached with the EU. But we do not in this House need others to tell us how to protect workers' rights and other rights. And indeed, as my honourable friend well knows, in many areas this Parliament goes further than the EU in the rights it safeguards, not least in areas such as maternity and paternity rights. And I look forward, following the manifesto commitment to high standards, to this House continuing that tradition and maintaining good standards. Of course I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. One of the things that concerns my folks on the Isle of Wight and indeed the South Coast was seeing a super trawler hoovering up about 250 tonnes of fish a day off Shanklin and indeed off Eastbourne. And isn't one of the great benefits of the withdrawal bill and leaving the European Union and getting a new fisheries bill is that we will control our ability to stop super trawlers coming into our seas, which at the moment we're not allowed to do because of our membership of the European Union.
Well, my honourable friend is right. One of the key features of taking back control of our waters is indeed that we in this Parliament will make those decisions. And one of the mysteries that we often feel with the benches opposite is that those in Scotland don't have self-confidence in order to have those decision-making powers, want to give them back to those in Europe. I'll take one more and then make progress, David.
Listening with great interest to what my right honourable friend is saying, but can he also confirm that when we leave the EU we'll have control over our taxes again and we can make decisions on VAT and all the other taxes we want to do?
Well, my honourable friend is right, and indeed if you look what we will do with the control of our taxes, the commitments in our manifesto, and also what this government has already done to raise the amount people can earn before they pay tax, because we believe in backing those who wish to work and provide for their families, and our tax system will do exactly that. Mr Deputy Speaker, along with the terms of our withdrawal, this bill reflects the political declaration which sets out the framework of our future relationship. Now, we need to get on with negotiating on this basis so we can agree our future relationship by the end of the implementation period on 31st December 2020. The Shadow Brexit Secretary referenced Clause 33. Clause 33 reinforces a commitment given by the government in its manifesto not to extend this period. And Part 5 of the political declaration is clear. We are committed to developing in good faith agreements giving effect to our future relationship, the cornerstone of which is a comprehensive free trade agreement by the end of 2020. Now, the Shadow Brexit Secretary said Clause 33 was ridiculous, but it is not ridiculous to act on manifesto commitments that we have given to the electorate. And indeed, it is not ridiculous when the EU themselves, in the political declaration, has agreed to the timetable to the end of December 2020 on which we make that commitment. And indeed, if that was the central concern of the benches opposite, you would have thought that would have been better reflected in talks on earlier deals when the party raised many other objections which underlined the fact that they simply did not want to see Brexit delivered at all. Mr Deputy Speaker, we now have a deal that reflects both the single largest democratic exercise in British history in the referendum and the defining issue of the general election. It is the time to end the delay, to come together and heal our divisions, and above all to listen to the people we serve. The British public have given their instruction. This bill delivers Brexit. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye! The contrary, no? No! Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 358. The noes to the left, 234.
The ayes to the right were 358. The noes to the left were 234. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Back of the net.
Programme motion move formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right were 353. The noes to the left were 243.
The ayes to the right were 353. The noes to the left were 243. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Money resolution move formally.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Ways and Means resolution move formally.
I beg to move.
Question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. This is probably strictly out of order, but I suspect that honourable members will be leaving in a few moments. Can I, on behalf of the Speaker, wish all honourable members on both sides of the House a happy Christmas and a very peaceful New Year. The question is that the House do now adjourn.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Right, mate. Merry Christmas.
Thanks very much. Merry Christmas, everyone. Cheers. Thanks very much. Merry Christmas.